Today we're looking at lesson 45, which is classifying quadrilaterals. Now, to classify is just a spiffy word for naming and taking a look at their characteristics, and their names come from their characteristics. Quadrilaterals, that is a fancy word for saying four-sided shapes. Quad means four, quadrilaterals. Classifying quadrilaterals. Now, you're going to be writing a lot in your notes today, but we're going to be moving pretty quickly. So make sure you use your pause if you need to stay up with me. But we are going to move quickly because it's really just giving names to different shapes. Let's start off with a basic chart that we're going to be referring back to many times today. So up at the top, go ahead and write, or actually I should say draw, a rectangle and put quadrilaterals on the inside. Quadrilaterals. Now, we're going to break the types of quadrilaterals up. They're all quadrilaterals. They all have four sides, but we're going to divide them into three different groups. First, we have a group that looks like this. If you draw a straight line, parallel to each other, and then parallel line, parallel line. I'm going to go back through and erase what I don't need and add in my shape. Now, this you can write underneath that. You can write underneath that parallelogram. Whoops, sorry about that. P-A-R-L-L-E-L-O-G-R-A-M-S. Parallelograms. Now, the parallelograms will have parallel pairs of lines that are the same length. So, this set of lines, and I'm going to make my line just a little bit thicker so you can see it. This set of lines right here is parallel to this set of lines. And this set of lines right here is parallel to this set of lines. So it has two sets of parallel lines. Two sets of parallel lines would be a parallelogram. Now our next shape is drawn up here, and if you put them with a short line and a long line and then connect the two edges, that is called a trapezoid. Trapezoid. It's kind of a fun name. Now notice, a trapezoid is still a quadrilateral. It has four sides on it. Now, can you tell the difference between the trapezoid and the parallelogram? Hopefully it jumped out right away at you that it only has one set of parallel lines. Those lines are parallel. If you look here and here, those are not parallel. So, parallelogram has two pairs of parallel lines, where a trapezoid has only one pair of parallel lines. And then we get to our last one, which is really kind of weird looking. If you can follow the pattern, you saw two sets of parallel lines, one set of parallel lines, and this one has no parallel lines. So with no parallel lines, you can see right here we have a line here, but that's not parallel with anything. We've got another line right here. That's not parallel with anything. Third line here, not parallel with anything. And fourth line right here, not parallel with anything either. So this last one is just all over the place, and it is called a trapezium. Trapezium. So we've got a parallelogram, two sets of parallel lines. Trapezoid, one set. Well, let's write that in. Two sets of parallel lines. Trapezoid, one set of parallel lines. Trapezium, zero sets of parallel lines. The trapezium, remember, is just kind of all over the place. So those are all types of quadrilaterals. Now, we're going to break it down even more in the next chart. Before we go on to the next chart, though, cover up what you just did and draw me a sample of a parallelogram, a trapezoid, and a trapezium. So give me an example of each one. So the parallelogram, you should have drawn something that looks like this, where you have two sets of parallel lines, and you could have done anything with the sides. You could go straight up and down, they're parallel. You could have drawn something that looked like this, where the lines are parallel this way. Just make sure you don't get lazy and forget to erase. So, a parallelogram. Then the next thing you were to do is to draw me a sample of a trapezoid. Trapezoid. And your trapezoid, remember, one set of parallel lines. So if you were to draw something that went like this and like this, then you would have a trapezoid. There's a couple of other ways to draw it too, but that's probably your most common. And the final one that you were to draw me a sample of is a trapezium. And that's the little guy that's just all over the place. No sets of parallel lines at all. So you would just draw 4 lines, making sure none of them are parallel to each other. Okay, hopefully you've got all those 3, and let's move on to the next part of the chart, which is working with parallelograms. Now, if we were to take a look at parallelograms, let me draw just one sample of a parallelogram up here. If we were to classify parallelograms, we actually could break them into 2 different groups and actually then add in a third. So our first type of parallelogram is a rectangle. And our second is a rhombus. Now there is a difference between them, and the interesting part is you're going to have to think back to use a word that we've used in the past, and that word is congruent. Congruent is very, very important to telling the difference between rectangles and what we call a rhombus. Kind of a weird spelling of the word too. Rhombus. Now here's the difference. This, a triangle, has 4 congruent Remember, that means same size, 4 congruent angles. A rhombus has 4 congruent sides. So the sides are all the same length. Rectangle, 4 congruent angles, but notice the sides have different lengths. The rhombus has 4 congruent sides. Now we're going to add in a little tricky one in here, and that is a square. A square is actually a rectangle and a rhombus because it has 4 congruent angles and it has 4 congruent sides. So our square is kind of a little special guy who's a combination of a rectangle and a rhombus. Again, congruent being the key. The congruent means that the rectangle has 4 congruent angles. The angles are all going to be the same. The rhombus has 4 congruent sides, so the sides are going to be the same. And a square is a perfect joining of the two. It has 4 congruent angles and 4 congruent sides. So let's